Welcome to the RFP Success Show with host Lisa Rehurek, the #1 sought-after authority on RFP success. Each week, we bring you information, strategies, or resources to help you win more business through RFPs and have a little fun doing it. Let's get this week's episode started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurek, founder and CEO of the RFP Success Company. And today we're talking about building an effective proposal team and how important it is to make sure that you understand the different roles you need on the team. Now, I want to preface this by saying that there are a gazillion ways to do this, and it really does depend on the business that you're in and how large your business is. So this particular podcast is probably not for the large companies that have a dedicated proposal team, where you've got all of the different roles. They're very well defined and they're very well fulfilled. This podcast is much more for the small business who doesn't have any dedicated or very little dedicated resources for RFPs. So actually it's kind of for two different types of people, two different types of businesses. That small business who, you've got to pull people off of the streets to help write this RFP. We're going to talk about the different roles that you need. And this is also important for those businesses who are like, all right, we're ready to start hiring. We might need one person, or we might be able to hire one full-time person to do proposals, or maybe we're looking at, dedicating a couple of people and building a team. That's who this podcast is for. And I also want to tell you that next week, the podcast, I've got a guest coming out of the podcast who's going to be talking about hiring and what to look for and how to hire. So for those of you who are getting ready to just build your teams, that whole conversation is happening next week. But today we're going to talk about the different roles and what you should make sure you've got covered. One of the things that I see with small businesses all the time is that, one person, maybe it's the owner, maybe it's the technical expert, is trying to do everything. And that's really detrimental to your success with RFPs because you can't be objective. One of my favorite quotes, if you've been following me for a while, you've probably heard this 10 times. One of my favorite quotes is by a guy by the name of Les Brown, motivational speaker. And the quote is that you can't see the picture when you're inside the frame. And what that means, it's such a brilliant statement because it means that when we're too close to it, we just can't see it. And even for us at the RFP Success Company, when I'm managing a proposal and I'm trying to be the strategic advisor, it just doesn't work because you're too embedded in it to be objective, to think strategically. You're too embedded in it sometimes to even see all of the requirements. You've got to have a second set of eyes on that. We always have a second set of eyes on the proposal to make sure we're not missing those requirements. So that's one of the things that you just, if you could get into that mindset of, hey, we've got to have multiple people. We're going to talk about who the key people are that you have to have, and if you don't have them internally, how you can get them. Of course, that's what we do, so that's something that we'll promote. But there's ways to get around. If you don't have budget for it, you don't have budget for it. What does that look like? So we're going to start off by talking about the 4 key roles that you absolutely have to have when you are responding to an RFP. And the first one is the executive sponsor. That is the owner of the company, the managing director, the partner, the sales professional, whoever, the business development director, whoever is owning that response. And it's really, really important to have that person. That's the person who is responsible for making sure everybody's committed. And we're going to go through each one of these roles in a little bit more detail, but executive sponsor is really important. The second one is the project manager, or also called the response manager. So the person who is managing all of the pieces of the puzzle, putting it maybe into the template, making sure that all the requirements are adhered to, making sure that all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together, and managing the timeline. The third key role is the writer, or writers. Obviously, we need writers to be writing the RFP. And then fourth is the administrative assistant or the editor, somebody who can, work with the project manager to get all the pieces of the puzzle together. So those are the 4 key roles. I want to dive into each one of them in more detail. So the first one, again, executive sponsor. This is the person that sets and shares the strategy. Now, one of the things that we always recommend is that you've got to have this upfront strategy, because you've got to understand what your strategy is in this bid, what your theme for the bid is, how you're differentiating yourself, why you're even bidding on this, and what it means to the company. And there's got to be somebody at a decently senior level that can do that. We do a lot of helping with the strategy, but we can't own the strategy. We can certainly help set it. We can certainly help figure out what that strategy is combined with that executive sponsor and the rest of the team. But you got to have an executive sponsor in there to do it. The other role of the executive sponsor is that they're really there to gain commitment of the team members and motivate them and make sure that everybody's on track. The executive sponsor really shouldn't be super involved in the day-to-day of the proposal. Where you want to bring the executive sponsor in is toward the end, really doing a strategic peer review, making sure that the themes have carried through, making sure that that strategy that they've set up front is carrying to the proposal. They should be helping do that final look because they're the ones responsible. The executive sponsor is really the owner of this opportunity, so they should make sure that the final look gets done, that they're ensuring delivery, whether they delegate that out to somebody, but making sure those pieces of the puzzle get done. They really shouldn't be writing, and they certainly shouldn't be managing. So those are all the pieces of what the executive sponsor is responsible for. Let's go to the role of the project manager. So the project manager or the response manager is kind of the linchpin of the proposal. They're the ones that create the project plan. Right up front, they create the template and create the calendar with the timeline and drive assignments and drive any sort of meetings that need to happen. So they're really the ones that own it. And, from our perspective, when we're managing the response, the first things we do is we develop a timeline, that calendar, the response calendar. We set up the template, which is the response template. Here are all the questions they're asking. Here's how we want to respond. And then we schedule meetings. So the first thing we do is schedule the kickoff meeting with the team, talk through assignments and all of that. But the project manager, shared responsibility with the executive sponsor to make sure those meetings get set and the right people are in those meetings. But the project manager then is going to drive, conversations and, the agendas, what we're talking about, what the timelines are, are we on track, and managing all of that. The other thing that the project manager, the response manager generally does, they manage the details, making sure all the requirements are met, making sure that all the forms are completed and signed, repurposing library content. So anytime you've got maybe a repository of library content, a lot of times the project manager will be the one that pulls that in, coordinating with the writers on that. Again, keeping everybody on track, keeping communication, open, not just waiting until the deadline to make sure writers are in on time, but maybe checking in with them a couple days early, a few days early. Hey, are you on track? Is there anything that you need? What's going to prevent you from meeting the deadlines and all of that? Because there is nothing worse than the writers missing their deadlines, because it messes with everything else. And I'll tell you, the writers don't understand that. They don't empathize with that. They're in their own world. So you've got to really stay on top of them so that they meet those deadlines. The project manager also to troubleshoot, and the project manager shouldn't be writing. The project manager really should be just gathering all of the pieces of the puzzle. If they're writing, then they get too embedded in that piece and they can't keep a clear head to manage the requirements and to help make sure that the questions that the writers, the answers that the writers have given adhere to the questions that are being asked. They can't do that if they're writing. All right. So that's number 2. The number 3 role is the writers. And we always suggest you having your technical writers, or the people that are writing, of course, their role is writing, period. That's all you want them to do. You don't want them to manage anything. You don't want them to do anything else. Keep their head clear, let them write. But I always suggest that you also have a lead writer, not the person that's writing all of the answers, but the person that can take all of the pieces of the different writers and make it cohesive and make it sound like there's only one voice and pulling it all together. We a lot of times will help do that with our clients, or we bring in writing team members to do that. again, really massaging the technical writing, making sure that it's cohesive and all of that. So you've got kind of a couple of different roles within the writer category. And then last but not least is the administrative assistant or the editor, somebody who can really help the project manager. So they can also create the response template in coordination with the project manager. They're the ones scheduling meetings and taking down meeting notes, helping the project manager to incorporate those sections. But really what it comes down to for the administrative assistant and the editor is formatting the document, cross-checking the requirements, so you've got a second set of eyes other than just that project response manager. The administrative assistant also completing the forms, getting signatures, editorial peer review and formatting, huge, making sure there's no spelling errors, making sure everything's consistent, doing all the nice formatting. And by the way, this all takes a lot of time. Please give them time and space because they are not magical little elves that show up in the middle of the night and sprinkle fairy dust on your RFP and make it easy. If you're somebody that has never done this piece of the puzzle, please do not take for granted the person who's doing the editing and the formatting. It takes a lot longer than you think. As a matter of fact, I believe the standard is maybe 30 minutes per page. So if you start thinking about how many pages you have, if you really want somebody to spend a good amount of time, give them at least 15 to 30 minutes a page. And then you'll start seeing how much time you need for this person and respect that. Because if you want your end result to go out and look good, then you've got to respect this role. And I will tell you, it is the least respected role on the proposal team. And it's a shame because it really is the last person that sees it and the last person that has their hands on it. So you want to make sure that you give them the time. They're also generally overseeing production and shipping and delivery to make sure that all gets done. If you've got to produce it, a paper copy, they're obviously doing live production. If you've got to put anything on USBs or on CDs or anything like that, this is the person that's going to be doing that. So that's the role of the administrative assistant. Now, there's other roles that you can bring in. I've talked about it a little bit throughout. You can outsource some roles. So here are some other roles. The marketing writer, I touched on this. If you want to have a person that can kind of take all that technical writing and make it sing and make it sound really cohesive and really give it that marketing spin that they need these days in order to sell it, then you can bring in a marketing writer. Strategic peer reviewer, again, that can be the executive sponsor. A lot of times it's great if it can be the executive sponsor and somebody else that really knows what they're doing and isn't necessarily close to the client because they can look at it super objectively. The third is a strategic advisor, somebody that can help advise. Again, this is something that we do a lot of. We do all of this, most of this, but the strategic advisor is that person up front helping set the strategy, helping talk about what are your differentiators? How are you going to distinguish yourself? How are you going to add extra value? What is your theme going to be? Sometimes it's great to bring in somebody to do that. And then also production crew. If you don't have a big production facility, maybe you can go out to Kinko's or whatnot, or hire an external production crew, which is Kinko's, but you can hire other people to do that. So those are some other roles. When we talk about outsourcing, what I want to say is that there's certain things that you can and cannot outsource. And this is a personal opinion of mine and the philosophy of the RFP Success Company because of what we've seen. Now, there are companies out there where you can give them the whole kit and caboodle and they'll do the whole thing. But when you're a smaller business, which most of you are that are listening to this, there's just some skin in the game that you've got to have. So here's what you can outsource. You can outsource the project or response manager. That's something that, again, we do, other companies do that. You can easily outsource that. You can outsource non-technical writing. And when I say non-technical, I mean things like the about us, the differentiators, kind of that general pieces of the puzzle. You can outsource that full writing. You can outsource technical writing, but this is, again, one of those things that I believe the technical experts need to be involved in that. If you outsource that technical writing, they need to be interviewing your technical staff to develop, and then the technical staff needs to be the ones peer reviewing that. So you can outsource that. You can outsource editorial support. For you small businesses, if you don't have a lot of, extra staff, this is a great thing to outsource. There are virtual assistants out there that you can find that you just hire for one-off projects, or you hire them for a certain number of hours a month. And you'll have to train them probably a little bit, but you'll have to train anybody. And they can really do that piece of the puzzle for you. And it's really nice if you don't have full-time support there. As we were just talking about strategic peer review and advisor, you can outsource that. What I believe you shouldn't outsource is the final look. That's really got to be done internally by you all. And by final look, what I mean is the person that is looking through the final version. If it's digital, looking through it digitally. If it's physical, going through every single one of the copies and almost page by page to make sure. You guys, I know that sounds crazy, but we have seen so many heartbreaking things when you look at just the original and you assume that all the copying went the way it was supposed to go. But if you've worked with copy machines very much, you'll know that things happen. And so you should always have somebody doing that final look. And that should be somebody internally, in my opinion, or at least somebody partnered with somebody internally, because it's your responsibility. This is your livelihood on the line. It's really hard to just outsource that and expect that somebody else is going to get it right on your behalf. And then the strategy piece, you can partner with somebody. We partner with people all the time on this, but you can't just outsource the strategy. That's got to be partnered with somebody for sure. If you're going to outsource roles, what you need to know is you got to understand your expense budget for an RFP response, either a dollar amount or a percentage of the value. And here's the deal, it's costing you money anyway. It's costing you money whether it feels like a hard expense or not. Instead of thinking about it as an expense, think about it as an investment. You should, if you're doing it all yourself, you should absolutely outsource. You can outsource to a company like mine. You can outsource to individual contractors. You could bring interns in to help support some of that, but you've got to really understand, what you're willing to put into it from a investment perspective to win that business. You also really need to have very clear role descriptions. So you've got to understand who's doing what and what their responsibilities are and who they're needing to work closely with. Because as you can hear from this, there was some overlap. There's overlap with the project manager and the administrative assistant at times. So you want to make sure those role descriptions are super, super clear. And then, of course, you've got to have trusted partners, people that you trust, because, again, this is your livelihood. This is a piece of business that is going to increase your revenue or waste a lot of time. So you want to make sure that you've got the right people in the right places to get that done. So again, I'm going to go back to the 4 roles: executive sponsor, project manager, writer or writers, and then the administrative assistant. And in a perfect world, that's 4 separate people at least. Obviously you can have more writers to really drive the success of a winning RFP response. All right, everybody, thanks for listening today. Again, next week, we've got a woman by the name of Devin Underwood, and she owns a company called The Talent Store, and she really has a very unique viewpoint on recruiting, and she's got some great tips for us around how to hire and how to make sure you're hiring the right person. So for those of you now that are saying, okay, wait a minute, we've got a full-time person or even a half-time person and they're going to be working on RFPs, she's going to help you understand how best to hire just in the context of hiring. All right, thanks again for listening, and we will see you again here next week.
You have been listening to the RFP Success Show with RFP expert Lisa Rehurek, author of the RFP Success book. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure you click the subscribe button so you don't miss a show. And thanks for spending time with us today.